Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm your host, Beth Stallwood. In this week's episode, I am joined by Dany Griffiths, who has a really interesting background and career and is an entrepreneur, has run and sold businesses, and is now the founder of the Feeling Zone. And Dany works with people to help them better understand and process and work and live following their emotions, following what feels right for them. It's a really interesting conversation where Dany talks us through her background, where she's come from, and the steps that she works through in the Feeling Zone to help people work through these emotions, and not to just go, that's a good emotion, that's a bad emotion, but what is the emotion telling us? How can it guide us? What does it want us to do? So it's a really interesting exploration of our emotions, and obviously how that's such an important part of our work joy, the emotions that we feel. So I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I know I did. Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm really excited today to be joined by Dany Griffiths, and I can't wait to have a conversation. I think it's going to be a really fascinating one. But before we dive in and start talking, Dany, would you be able to introduce yourselves to our lovely listeners and to tell us all a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are today?
Yes, thank you, Beth. And first of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be a guest on your wonderful WorkJoy Jam podcast. I very much enjoy listening to it. I am Dany Griffiths, founder of the Feeling Zone, where I teach people how to live with Feel Right Emotional Empowerment, or FREE for short. And for those who want to, they can also continue on with me to train as a specialist, so they can use Feel Right Emotional Empowerment with their work with others. Now, Feel Right Emotional Empowerment in a nutshell means using our feelings, our inner life navigation system, if you like, to always follow what feels right for us. And I have a deep passion for supporting mental health and emotional well-being. And I'm on a mission to change how we are taught about our emotions, and how by learning how to process them correctly, we can use all of our feelings to support us rather than inadvertently sabotaging us. Now, one of the first things we do when we enter the Feeling Zone is to look back on our timeline and look for significant experiences and how they make us feel, and how they impact us in the now and in our lives right now. So I thought I'd do that in relation to work joy. And and so looking back to my childhood, first of all, the first kind of experience, I guess, for work is looking at my parents. And I saw a complete contrast. And they own two cafes, and my dad loved every single second of working in them. My mum hated every single second of working in them, and that was very clear. So I could see it's such a contrast right from a young age of what it meant to have work joy and what it meant not to have work joy. Now, as any kid whose parents have got some kind of shop will tell you, your parents get you to work from a really, really young age. And I can tell you now, I hated working in a cafe, mostly because I was incredibly shy, very introverted. And so for me, the customer facing element was really, really scary. And I used to like to kind of just be in the back doing the washing up, which everyone found bizarre. But it really wasn't for me. But I had to do it for many, many years. And then I'd say kind of like the next time I was thinking about work was, that age where you're thinking about, do you want to go on to university or college, or, what are you thinking about in terms of your career? And the school I went to was very much expecting of everyone to go to university, become a lawyer, a doctor, an accountant, that kind of thing. And I felt really let down. I'm 53 years old, so I don't think there was the same kind of career support back then. And I felt really let down because no one was helping me explore the things that interested me and what that might look like in a career. So because also when you work for your parents, you don't get a lot of money, I thought, what's the quickest way for me to start earning money? So I ended up going to Pitman Secretarial College, going to actually getting very lucky in the jobs that I had money-wise. That's what I was looking for. I earned good money from the get-go, but I was really, really bored in work. And I found joy through people, but eventually, very quick, I think I had a job a year pretty much till I was around 24, 25. And then I started working for Debenhams, who sadly are no more, in their head office in HR. Again, I joined as a secretary, but because it was HR, because of the nature of the people I was working with, they were very much kind of supportive of me looking for something more. And I started with CIPD, the HR exams, which I hated. I was very much a square peg in a round hole. That wasn't for me. But I did manage to stay at Debenhams in the HR department for 15 years, simply because I was lucky in that people helped me, my bosses helped me find work that did fill me up. But when I was around 26, 27, I actually got glandular fever. I worked with glandular fever until my doctor told me I had to stop. And I believe that came about through a number of things, doing the CIPD exams and actually not being emotionally invested in it. It wasn't right for me. My dad getting sick and very quickly dying of cancer, getting married very quickly, finding all sorts of things were wrong with that marriage and getting divorced. And I became ill. And when the doctor said, take time off work, there was something in me saying, there's got to be more to this, well, life in general, but work as well. And I started exploring. By chance, came across a hypnotherapy and counselling diploma, which I went to a weekend workshop, loved it, signed up, had the best year of my life. And then kind of like played around with what do I want to do with this? What do I want to do with this? And eventually kind of fell into working with Beth, still working for Debenhams, fell into working for Beth. Then my best friend had a fertility struggle, so I started using my hypnotherapy skills to support her and was really starting to enjoy this other life of work. And somewhere along the line, I read something about emotions, and it said anger was about fairness and setting boundaries. And that was like a boom moment for me, a real kind of significant thing for me, because it started this little sort of idea germinating that, this work that I've been doing, I'm seeing the emotions coming through, I'm seeing the difficulties with how people are feeling, kind of preparing for birth and the fertility journey, what have you. And I wanted to explore that more. And also for myself, I'd always had a big trouble with anger. And everyone telling me I was wrong to feel angry. But really, what I was seeking was fairness. And I had really fuzzy boundaries. So that was all really interesting for me. But still, I'm carrying on working for Debenhams, because I had hooked work with money. So it wasn't until I had my son when I was 39 and we started looking at childcare costs that I said to my husband, you know what, I'm doing okay with this little side business. If I take out the childcare costs, this is all I have to earn out of my little side business. I don't want to go back to work. And I never did. And what's interesting for me, Beth, is that I said I didn't want to go back to work. And when you approached me, I thought, oh, this isn't right for me. I don't work.
You do work.
And I do work. And the thing is, I think that's the ultimate work joy, because I hadn't actually really thought about what I do as work, even though I do work and I do work hard. But it was just interesting. I said I didn't want to go back to work. I wanted to run my business. So I then kind of from there, in 2013, I wrote the YCPO birthing program, which became, it is very well known. It changed the face of hypnobirthing. I sold that business a couple of years ago. And in 2018, I launched my Freedom Fertility Formula program, where I kind of tested, if you like, Feel Right Emotional Empowerment. And then this year I launched the Feeling Zone. And now I am on my mission to spread Feel Right Emotional Empowerment across the globe. So that's me in a nutshell.
It's so amazing. I've been like writing notes as you've been talking. Like, I want to say about 12 million things about all the different experiences you've had. And the first one I'm going to pick up on is probably one of the last things you said. It's like, oh, but I don't really work. It's like, yeah. And it's really interesting because when I talk about WorkJoy, a lot of people who are either freelance, who run their own business, who are more entrepreneurial, it's like, oh, yeah, I don't really work. I'm like, yeah, but for me, work includes anything that you do where you're using your energy or your effort or your knowledge or your skills to do something, whether that's in employment, whether that is working for yourself, whether that's, life admin and all that pesky stuff that we have to do when we become grown up, housework and all the other stuff. It's all work. It's all work.
Yeah.
Work is like it's a fundamental part of the human experience, work, and it's actually really important for us. But finding the stuff that brings you the joy is the really interesting part. And it sounds like you've been on your own little WorkJoy journey to get to where you are today.
Absolutely.
And really, I'm really fascinated to talk about this stuff and around the emotional side of things. And one of the things I wrote down from what you were saying early on is about how do we follow the path that feels right for us? And so often in life, and you've been through this and we've all been through it actually in some ways, is that we think that there is a set path that we have to follow, or there's the kind of norm versus the what do we really, really want to do. So I'm really interested in kind of thinking about this. And I'm also really interested about this idea of the feel right stuff. And I'm probably not saying it exactly right, so do correct me. So this is your new thing that you have that's out there in the world this year, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about it and what's involved with it, because this idea for me about actually how do we better understand the emotions we're having, I think is really interesting. And I think as you experience there with the stuff about anger, is we're often told that some emotions are good and some emotions are bad, and therefore we suppress some of those emotions and ignore them and ignore what they're trying to tell us. So yeah, and I know this stuff, but you know it way better. So tell me a little bit more about what brought you to this side of things, to be thinking about emotions and some of the stuff that we can maybe consider in our worlds to help make us understand our emotions a bit better.
Yeah. So I mentioned that I always had this thing with anger. Growing up, someone could cause me to scream and shout very, very easily. Mainly my brother teasing me and tormenting me. But of course, what I heard all through my childhood was, anger is bad. Anger is bad. And you see, don't you, kind of anger management, and that actually makes me angry when I see anger management, because it's not anger management we need, it's aggressive management, because people aren't taught how to use their anger in the first place, so they end up suppressing it and getting frustrated, and then that comes out as aggression, and it's aggression that's bad. And the thing is, because we're taught that some are bad and some are good, who wants to be identifying with a bad emotion, particularly something like anger? So we do squash it down, we do push it away. Other emotions are put on us, things like guilt, they're put on us by other people, and we either don't want to be feeling guilty, or we feel it too much, and we look for ways to try and help us deal with those feelings that are not about the feeling itself. And yet what I started to, as soon as I read this idea that anger was about fairness, I knew I had fuzzy boundaries. It's taken me a long time, by the way, to get my boundaries sorted, but fuzzy boundaries and fairness, and I thought, well, if I've got anger wrong all these years, there must be something else going on with feelings. And what I became aware of is that often when people talk about feelings and emotions, they'll talk about it from the perspective of the fight flight response, that there's a part of our brain that's a survival brain that will cause us to run away or stand and fight when there's issues. But I started to think about the caveman, in my Hollywood example of the caveman that I talk about. And I thought, well, do you know what? He didn't have to run away from making sure he had shelter. He didn't have to fight to make sure he had a fire. So even with our primitive brain that subconsciously runs the show, so when we have all these kind of learnings, which I call route maps, that are being activated. People tend to say triggered, I say activated, and cause us to respond in certain ways. They're just our learnings, the way that we've been taught how to respond. So with the caveman, even though he didn't have this conscious analytical brain, his primitive brain still had to do a little bit of planning. So I thought, well, he would get fear to activate him, to make sure he had shelter, and let's say her as well, he wasn't alone in this, and they would make sure they had fire and all those things. So there is a part of the primitive brain that is not in a conscious analytical way planning for the future, but in the next step kind of approach to future. And that's where I started to realise that our feelings are meant to guide us forward to the next best step, not just, an immediate reaction response, like, the modern day example of fear causing fight, flight, freeze would be if you're about to step out in front of a lorry, for example, and it honked its horn, you'd jump back, wouldn't you? You wouldn't wait and with your conscious brain be wondering, oh, what's that sound? You just jump back and then look for the sound. So we have that element, but in the main we've got this very complicated world. There's all sorts of things that are creating kind of fears and uncertainties within us. But if we go back to basics and say, well, the feelings are there to guide us as well to the next best step, not just the emergency response. What are our feelings wanting us to do? And what I realised, if we don't actually do that, if we don't say, what's the purpose of the feeling? How does it want to guide me? And then take action on the feelings never get processed. And that's why we get all of these stuck emotions. And there's this big world of, let's look at how we remove the toxic emotions in the body.
Oh, gosh, it's amazing. Really interesting. And thinking about those experiences and that idea that, anger equals bad. I don't want to be seen as a bad person, therefore I'm wrong to feel anger. Is a reaction that doesn't process the feeling, right? It's one that doesn't help us understand, why is it? Are there some boundaries that aren't right? Is there some things I should be doing differently? Is some planning I need to do? Do I need to get out of a, relationship that's not working for me? Do I need to step out of this and do something different? Those questions don't come if we just think this equals bad.
Exactly.
So I think is that right? So
yes.
what I think where I'm thinking about this now is I'm thinking where you're at here is, let's be a bit more mindful about what our emotions are there and how do we understand what they are, and how do we then get them out and talk about them and discuss them, even if it's in our own minds, to then use them as a route for what is this telling us and what should we do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of one sector of the feeling zone, if you like, that we do that piece of work, because unfortunately we haven't been taught this from birth. And even actually, if we taught it from birth, if our mothers haven't been taught it, we pick up their unhelpful route maps, their ways of being and living when we're being carried. So I believe actually the reason I have or had a big thing with anger is that sadly for my mum, my biological dad died when she was 8 months pregnant with me. And the way she responded to that was she was really angry that he left us. I've got an older brother as well, and she was really angry that he left us. And I didn't know till I was 16 that my dad who brought us up wasn't my biological dad. But I had this kind of learning from before I was born of anger and unfairness and injustice, and that kind of followed me from birth, So we're not taught this stuff, so we have these unhelpful route maps, so we have to do work around that. And of course that's where we hear a lot of we need to remove the toxic emotions from the body part, but no one's saying, well, let's look at how the emotions are getting stuck in the first place. Not really. And then when they are working on it, things like emotional intelligence, emotional resilience, things like that, they're actually not processing the feelings. They're just teaching us how to control them. So they're adding to the problem further down the line.
Yeah. So can we dive into it in a little bit more?
Yes.
I'm getting it and I'm loving it. I'm thinking it's a really interesting place. So can you talk us through, obviously there's that, like, number one, you shouldn't be feeling that emotion, or the let's get it out of your body, you just need to get rid of it, seeing it's a toxic thing, it's not good for you, etc. If we were to take the feeling zone approach to it and say, let's take anger or frustration or whatever label you would put on it as an example, and let's put it in the work context for now. So perhaps there's somebody at work that you often find triggers that emotion within you, and you're in that experience. If we were to take that, how would you work with someone to kind of understand what that is? And we can make up a scenario as much as we want to kind of exaggerate and kind of explain the point, but I'd love to know how we would go from, okay, I've noticed I'm feeling this emotion, I'm not going to say that it's a bad emotion, I'm not going to say it's a good emotion, I'm just going to say it's an emotion. What do we do next to help ourselves explore it?
Yeah, let me take you on a journey through the feeling zone, because that will answer that question completely.
That sounds amazing. Let's do it. I'm on board.
Okay, so there are 7 sectors of the feeling zone, and they all interplay with each other, but we actually work through them in an order. So if you imagine a circle, if you like, and then there's 6 sectors going around the circle, and then they all point into the middle. And the middle is a dynamic empowerment piece, which is the final sector, and it is a dynamic process. So we learn step by step, but each piece fits into the final flow of how we live our lives, living with feel right emotional empowerment. So we start with clarity empowerment, and what we do in the first instance, as I said, we do a little bit of kind of exploring what are the significant experiences. We start to draw out, even from the right at the beginning, what things might be working against us from a feeling perspective. We look at where we're at right now in terms of our life across 9 categories and kind of what's working. 2 of those are colleagues and work. So we can already start just with simple scoring. And it goes from -10 to 10. I'll tell you why in a moment. We score, how do we feel about our colleagues? How do we feel about work? And we look for the most significant reason for the score, because we start right there, the significant reason, everything else falls underneath it, right? Then we look at what we want, but we look at what we want from a feelings perspective. And this is where I think a lot of people kind of set themselves up for fail, because they'll look for things from a experiential, practical, materialistic perspective right from the get-go. But if we say, how do we want to feel, we can always find things now in this moment that will give us those feelings. And then all of the other stuff, again, falls off of that. So we get clarity right at the beginning around how do we actually want to be feeling? And if we take the workplace, how do we want to be feeling in our relationships with our colleagues? How do we want to be feeling in our work and those that are connected to our work? Then we go into the foundational empowerment section. It's all about empowerment. And we lay down like a pathway for success, and we look at emotional care. Because the reason I have -10 to +10 is that 0 represents neutral. So 0 represents that space where we come back from excitement and doing fulfilling work and all of that to a place of calm and rest and relaxation. And then anything below that line in the minus, that's when we're living in the emergency state. And the emergency comes from anything that's distressing us and causing us upset. Now we flow. I call life an emotional roller coaster. Some people say, oh, life's, getting too much for me right now, or I'm on the emotional roller coaster right now. But actually, life is always an emotional roller coaster. In each and every single day, we can have stuff that pulls us down into the emergency state. It could be small stuff, it could be massive stuff. There's stuff that can bring us joy and fulfillment and all of those things. But we almost always must come back to neutral to recover and to rest and relax. So that's our foundational step. Then we go into conscious empowerment. So this is where we do the conscious processing of our feelings. This is where we start saying, I've noticed that this feeling has come up for me right now. We see our feelings as our friends. They're coming in to help us and guide us. And I have what I call a 4A process. So if there was something going on with a colleague at work, we would say, okay, what am I feeling right now? Yeah. And there's 2 different types of feelings we look at: the feelings in the now and the recurring feelings. The recurring feelings that come up a lot, so like me, I mentioned it was anger, because there are root maps then activating our behaviour that's often nothing about the person in front of us, or the experience that we're having. So we say, first of all, what's the feeling? So we become aware of the feeling. We acknowledge the feeling. We say in our minds, thank you for showing up to help me. Because when you say thank you to your feelings, as opposed to everyone else saying some of the feelings are good, some of the feelings are bad, we're saying, thank you, friend, for coming in to help me. And we're on the same side, which is so powerful in itself. If you're on the same side as your feelings, you're not battling against them. And then we do an analysis piece. And I break the brain up into a simple thinking brain, which is our conscious analytical part of our brain, and our feeling brain, which is that subconscious, the primitive, the part of our brain that cares about our survival only. So we look at facts with the thinking brain, and then we tune in with our feeling brain at a sixth sense level. Now, once we get practiced, because although with a top level thing like anger, we can say it's about safety, it's about fairness, and it's about setting boundaries. Obviously, there's loads and loads of feelings that sit underneath that category. And it's not simple, let's get out the dictionary and see what guidance that is. So we use the sixth sense to get what I call sixth sense downloads. And the more we get practice at this, the thoughts come in rather than us going to our thinking brain to find the facts, if that makes sense. And then whatever the action is, we have to take it. Otherwise, the feeling is a process. So with a colleague, we can start exploring what's happened in the now and finding the next best step to take in the now. But then we've probably noticed as well that it's activated an awareness of unhelpful root maps. So when we go into the next sector of the feeling zone, the subconscious empowerment piece, we do work on root map reprogramming and then rewiring some new root maps. We could do a bit of work in physical empowerment as well in the next sector. And then we get to the social empowerment sector. And again, this is really, really useful for the workplace, because often with self-development, personal development, we're doing work on us. And then we get out in the big wide world. And of course, anybody who knows us responds to us and treats us in the same way they always have. They expect us to show up in the same way we always have. So that can get in the way of how we want to be. And also how they are is going to affect how we want to be. But when we've learned ourselves how to understand the feelings in this way, we tend to go in with more compassion, because we're looking at them and we can see that they're coming from a place of unhelpful root maps. So we tend to go into interactions with others with a different head on. And something I always say, the difference between my work and a lot of work, which is around kind of, mindset type of stuff, is that when we are in a situation that causes upset, when we go down to the emergency state, and research backs this up, the part of our brain, so the primitive part of our brain that kind of looks around for the emergency, takes energy away from the part of the brain that deals with the higher tasks, like going, oh, what is that mindset I've got to tap into to be able to deal with this tricky colleague who's upsetting me? Whereas if we always go to how am I feeling and the 4A process, we're immediately in that space of useful resource, if that makes sense. And then all of that feeds into the final kind of sector, the dynamic empowerment piece, where we're looking how it all works together, just how I've shown you, and we've embodied it, so we're living it. So we come to the feelings every single time. How am I feeling right now? 4A process. Do I need to do some rewiring? How do I show up in the social empowerment piece with this person who's just upset me?
It's so interesting, that whole kind of journey through it. And I can imagine for some really deep set route maps, that's a kind of a big thing to tackle. But then also just for those small moments in time, it's something to kind of go, oh, I can work through this as a process in my head and kind of understand better what's going on and how I could not step into. Because the thing I'm thinking about here is like that emotional downward spiral thing you then feel bad and feel worse because you've taken an action that you didn't want to take because of the things that you've done kind of unconsciously. You're kind of addressing all the different aspects of it. And it's really interesting, again, to talk about the social empowerment side, is understanding how other people are working, etc., and having that empathy for others. Because often if we can step away from how we feel about things and look at how other people might be feeling about it, we can usually get better relationships from understanding.
And what I would say is it doesn't mean, like, so for example, I'll be the first to say to people, it doesn't mean I don't ever lose my SHIT. I do, because I have my own route maps, and we have such it's the biggest onion to delayer that there ever is. You can't ever get to all of those route maps, because we have the core route maps, and then we have route map layered on route map on layered on route map. But what it means is, if we've got both of those pieces, the conscious and the subconscious, and we have got a dynamic process to deal with them, even if we do have a moment of upset, we don't beat ourselves up. We go to, what do the feelings now in this moment want to guide me towards? So every moment is a new beginning. We say, okay, so I've lost my temper, I've reacted and responded in a way that I'm not happy with, or for others it might be that they ran away and they didn't confront something and they wish that they could have stood up for themselves. It's not just about anger, obviously. So they say, okay, the feeling I've got right now, how does that want to guide me? So we never go into the spiral, even when we have responding in a way that we don't like, and then we recognize, there's another a route map that I can do some work on.
And obviously we've taken anger as the example here, but I can imagine all those, I'm actually feeling really upset by what's happened today. Where does that come from? Oh, that's triggered some stuff in me from something that happened at school, or it's triggered something here. And actually it's not necessarily about this person who's triggered it within me. It's about understanding where that comes from and knowing that that's not how that person intended it, and that's why there's so many different things from that.
And also it's interesting that you pick on upset, because for a while I had a bit of a thing myself where I thought, what if you feel angry because somebody's done something and you can't make it fair? Because obviously anger shows up to put right an injustice that has been done wrong to you. But there are situations where people are just mean to you and you can't do anything about that. And so I had a little kind of thought about that. And in fact, the universe is very kind to me, and it often gives me experiences so I can explore the feelings. And we had a particularly upsetting experience with our son in April of this year. And it was that situation. It was something very unfair had happened. I was very angry about it, but there was nowhere for my anger to go. And what I realised there with the upset is that sadness stepped in. And sadness is about giving us time to heal. And sadness stepped in to help me move through the feelings of upset. And this is what I love about the feelings. If we're always looking for their wisdom and guidance, we stay in flow. It isn't about saying that life is always positive. I do not subscribe to the positivity pandemic. I also don't like the gratitude bomb that gets dropped a lot on us, but we are always in flow with our feelings, and we're only in the emergency state when it's appropriate to be there. We're in the living state because we know how to move up there and enjoy life and have those fulfilling experiences. We come back to neutral in order to rest, relax, or retreat sometimes when there's been upset and things like that.
Yeah. And it's really interesting that all the things you're saying are so really aligned with WorkJoy as well.
Yes.
I am so keen that people don't perceive what we're talking about as this idea that you can be 100% joyful and never be miserable about stuff. Because I'm like, we live in the real world, and you said it there. Life is always an emotional roller coaster. Yeah. If you take that down to work is always an emotional roller coaster as well. There are high stress situations, there are amazing laughs, there are brilliant times that you have, amazing achievements and all the great stuff. And there's also, the stuff that drives you absolutely mad. And I always say to people, if they've got a lot of work gloom, so the opposite of work joy going on, try not to aim to get to work joy, aim to get to neutral.
Yes.
Because neutral is way better than gloom. But sometimes, like there's I work for myself, and I get to do all the cool stuff, and I love it, and it's amazing, and I get to choose who I work with and all the things that brings. that doesn't mean that I live 100% joyfully in my work. There's still stuff I have to do. Like, you're never going to find me having any joy when I have to complete a tax return or do something that involves lots of spreadsheets and sciencey stuff. That's not my bag, but I still do it. But I can do it in a neutral state. I can do it at that. I'm just there. It's fine. Versus the the excitement stages. I think us aiming to be at a 10 all the time, number one, isn't realistic, therefore always going to be disappointed. And number two, it's also not healthy, because it's that state is quite, I mean, being in the -10 is exhausting, but so is being at +10. We need to be able to have that middle ground,
and
right?
This is what when I talk to people about the scoring, so in terms of the kind of depth of feeling that I have, that's always in flow. As I say, we kind of move up and down. I have a compass which shows how the different kind of states work, the difference of when we're in the now, and it's okay when we're up in the living state to bring lovely positive stuff from the past and look forward with hope and expectation. But when we're down in the emergency state, we can get stuck in the past and we can get stuck worrying and anxious about the future. So my compass kind of shows all of that. But when I'm actually doing the positive pathway planner piece, where I'm saying score where you're at in your life right now, and we had those same numbers, what it's actually saying is a 10 out of 10 is saying, is my life what I want it to be? So that isn't perfection. That's just saying, from my my work, for example, am I getting all the things in my job that I want? Now that scoring then evolves with us. So we get to a level in our work and we'll go, that's no longer a 10 out of 10, because now I've realised I'm ready to up level.
Yes.
So that shifts and moves. So although I do have 10 out of 10, I totally agree with you. It's not about perfection, because life is never perfect.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so passionate about spreading Feel Right emotional empowerment across the globe, because if we're always following what feels right for us, then we're always going in a direction that is right for us. So if we come back to our colleagues and kind of relationships with others in the social empowerment sector, we look at a couple of things. And the first one is, how do we want to show up? And I'm also, there's lots of things that I like to kind of re-educate on, and the word selfish is one of them, because I think there's nothing wrong with being selfish. And
I've been saying, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm going to have to say this now. For about the last 2 years, I've been saying to people, we need a new word for selfish. Because selfish has so many negative connotations around it that people automatically assume it's a bad thing. And I'm like, no, making decisions that are best for you is not a bad thing. So
no.
we need to find one, Dany. We need to find a word for it.
There are so many things, Beth. When I listen to you on your podcast, which I do a lot now when I'm out in the car, I think, oh yeah, Beth and I, we're best buddies. We've got to get together and talk more. Here we are. So selfish, for me, is that whole kind of like, if we're following what feels right, and actually if it's right to be 100% selfish, if all of us actually did these three things, then the world would be a much better place. So sometimes it's right for us to be 100% selfish and do what we want and not worry about what other people think, because it's right for us. Other times it's right for us to be 100% selfless. So when we're choosing what feels right, sometimes we might say, right, okay, it's right for me to spend time doing this for another person and actually put what I want to be doing to aside for a moment, because that's what is right for me to do. Most of the time, hopefully, in useful relationships, we're all doing something in between to a certain extent. But actually, if we're recognizing that we want to be selfish sometimes, we also appreciate that when someone else is being selfish, that it's right for them. Now, where this all interplays is, if my idea of selfish, for example, doesn't fit with my husband, he's then got a right to come in and go, I think you're being a little bit too selfish. And this is where my ABC comes in, because each of us can agree with what the other person is wanting to do. We can bargain, so we can do some negotiating from a win-win perspective, or we can cut loose if we've had enough, or when we can't. So coming back to work, if we've got a difficult colleague, we can't necessarily cut loose because the rest of our job is fine. but there are ways we can protect ourselves emotionally, which is still allowing our feelings to come through and not be suppressed and shut down. So, if, for example, I said to my husband, my idea of a great marriage is that I get to go away every single weekend with my girlfriends. And he says, that's not my idea of a good marriage. He's got a choice to put up or cut loose, So, for me, this is where if we're all just more open about how we feel, stop kind of trying to guilt people into doing stuff, stop being guilted into doing stuff, and we were all living life in a way that felt right for us, the world would most definitely be a much happier place.
Yeah, because actually there's a difference, isn't there, between 100% selfless, which is a conscious decision that you're doing this for somebody else, and doing something because you think you should, and resenting it, because people feel that resentment, right? If you turn up to something you don't want to be at, if you decide to do something that is just for the sake of the other person, but you're not actually genuinely doing it because you're making the decision it's for the other person, that's just not a great way to live.
No, but also some people don't care, do they? They'll guilt other people into doing stuff for them, and they don't care how that person's showing up. They don't care if that person resents them, but they're getting their own way. So, we're each responsible for making sure that we all feel that we're doing things that are right for us. And, the other person is also responsible. If someone says, I'm ready to cut loose, they can have a little look at how they're doing things and whether that's right for them also, So it doesn't mean that everyone's walking around going, oh, yes, I agree with your decision. But if we're all making sure we're following what feels right for us, then we get to a place where there's more harmony.
Yeah. Amazing. And I honestly, we could talk about this for another hour or so, but we can't keep talking about it because everyone else will drop off when they're listening. And obviously, we've got loads more chats to have than this, but it's great to hear this. And I have got, if it's okay with you, some quick fire questions for you. Okay. Now, bearing in mind, I know the fact you said right at the beginning, I'm not sure I really work. You do work. So I'm going to ask you the question. What's something that's always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
Well, I think the fact that I can work without it feeling work is obviously a joy. But really for me is I have my motto, simple solutions for powerful change. And what I love is when I'm working with people, and the work that I do is either kind of taking people on what I call a free life quest. So they're working purely for themselves, or they go on a longer journey so they can work with others. And whether they're on their own journey or whether they're seeing this work in the work they do with others, they cannot get over the simplicity, how quickly, we work together for around a 4-month period, and how quickly they go from, really, for some people, a deep place of struggle. If I take this work into fertility, for example, really, really dark places a lot of these people are coming to the work from, and then very quickly getting to a place where they feel so able to enjoy their lives, deal with the emotional roller coaster. So that seeing that kind of awareness and that realization of how simple it is to look at feelings in this way, and the power of that is just, it fills me up every time.
I love it. Right. Question 2. What book are you currently reading?
Now, I am notoriously bad at starting a book. If you look in my Kindle, there are so many books that are started, not finished, because I'm always like, your podcast is a nightmare for me, Beth, because of all the books that I'm like you. I'm like, oh, buy that book. And so I start them all and I don't finish them. But there's a book that I am currently reading, and I generally have Audible, or I say that, but I have Audible and I have the Kindle, and I do both. I listen and I read because that keeps my concentration. But the one I'm really determined to finish is called The Body Keeps the Score. Now, I heard about this book a long while ago, and I thought it wasn't for me, because I thought it was going to be all about feelings getting stuck in the body and releasing them. And someone directed me to it a few months ago, and my husband's had a really difficult time. He's recently been diagnosed with complex PTSD and ADHD. And this book is about using the mind, the brain and the body in the transformation of trauma. And I'm loving it so much because a lot of it is showing the research behind what I teach. So I'm reading this going, oh, wow, this is what I teach. This is what I teach. But it's also reassuring me that the things I'm doing with my husband are supporting him, because he's done a lot of work with other people that, let's just say, haven't been effective. And I said, you've got nothing to lose. Come on a free life quest. And it's been really, really life-changing for him, thank goodness. So that book I'm determined to finish. I'm chugging on through and I'm still there.
It sounds like definitely one worth looking at. Question 3. What's the best or most useful bit of advice that someone has given you in your life that you always find yourself coming back to?
Yeah, obviously I hear you ask this question a lot on the podcast, and I thought, oh, how would I answer that if Beth asked that of me? Because there's so many things, aren't there? So many great pieces of wisdom that you have along the way. So what I did was I put it over. I had this thing, as I said, called Sixth Sense downloads. It's just that, your subconscious sharing wisdom with you, just like when you set a problem before you go to bed and you wake up in the morning and there's the solution. So I told my subconscious to tell me something somewhere. And I was washing up the other day and it popped into my head and I thought, I have to share this. And I haven't thought about it for a long, long time. And it was from my nana. She always used to say, do everything with a good heart and life will never feel hard. And I thought, do you know what? I didn't realise it until that moment. So thank you for having this question, because it really, it was like, oh, wow, I love this. It made me realise she set me on this path of noticing feelings and following what feels right. Because actually, if you can't do something with a good heart, then you don't do it. It's not right for you, So I think that's such a lovely piece of wisdom that she shared right from when I was very young, that I think a lot of people get something from.
I love that. And isn't that interesting about how kind of coming back to it makes you think where all of this work and kind of your mission in life has come from, potentially something like that from when you were very young. I love it. It's a great bit of advice. Right. Next question. What is one super practical bit of advice to our listeners that's something that they could go and do right now, do it tomorrow, do it the next day, that you think would help them with their work joy?
Right, I want to teach something. It's really quick, but it's called Sixth Sense decision making. Okay, because a lot of the time I know that people get really caught up in overthinking, worrying, is this the right thing for me to do? Is that the right thing for me to do? And for me, this has been quite life-changing, because I was a massive worrier and overthinker. And I truly believe that we always have the answers within. And this is such a simple little technique, because we just tune in, we ask ourselves a question. So we take a breath, and as we breathe out, we ask ourselves a question, and we look for a yes, no, or if it's a choice, we look for the choice between A or B. Okay, so let's say, for example, if I was saying to myself, is it right for me to come and do this podcast with Beth? So take a breath in. As I breathe out, is it right for me to do the podcast with Beth? Yes or no? Now, the first response that comes in will be that Sixth Sense response that is right for you. And then the analysis will kick in. So whatever comes in first, the analysis kicks in with, oh, yeah, but if we practice with the small stuff, using the Sixth Sense technique, the decision-making technique, and we start to allow ourselves to follow what feels right, it's amazing where that leads.
So we ignore the overthinking bit that comes.
Yeah, we
just go. Stop overthinking there.
Which is why we practice with the small stuff. Okay. Because then we start to trust it. Because how often, Beth, do people ignore that Sixth Sense and then afterwards go, oh, wish I'd listened.
Yeah.
I wish I'd listened. So what we're doing is it's a bit like going to the gym. We're exercising that Sixth Sense muscle by practicing all of the small decisions, getting braver and braver and braver. And then after a while, we start to really get in flow with following what feels right for us.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I had a conversation with someone the other day where I was sitting there going, I knew, and I continued on with this thing because I thought, no, logically, I've answered like 12 different questions that this is the right thing. And then I was like, I knew it at the time. I don't know why I continued with it. It's really interesting. Oh, I'm going to practice that one. So, and also it's really easy to do, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What's the first answer? Love it. So before we finish off, Dany, where can people find out more about you, about the Feeling Zone, about your work, to get in touch, to follow you, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, very easy. Thefeelingzone.com. That's where you'll find me. And on Instagram, it's at the Feeling Zone Academy.
Brilliant.
Yes.
So we will also put those links into the show notes and on the Instagram, so that everyone can kind of click through and get to know you a bit better. Dany, thank you so much for your time today. It's wonderful to talk about this world of emotions, and I think there's so much more that people can go and learn if they go follow you and find out more. So thank you very much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
I'm glad your sixth sense said yes at that moment in time.
Me too.
Thanks so much, Dany. Have a great day.
Thank you.
A huge thank you to Dany for joining us and talking through everything to do with the Feeling Zone and her background, and some really interesting things that I think we can all take. I was actually trying to do some sketch noting, so I might pop those up as well whilst doing this. It's a skill I'm trying to develop, and some of the things that I really noted and really took there is this idea that life is always an emotional roller coaster, right? That is exactly what I talk about when it comes to WorkJoy. Is there's going to be highs, there's going to be lows. It's about understanding what they are, maybe doing more of the stuff that helps you do the high stuff, understanding how to manage some of the things that give you lows. So really interesting there. And this idea that actually things like anger are about fuzzy boundaries and about fairness, and really understanding what it is that's triggering us if we are angry, or triggering us if we are not feeling great about something, and exploring that at kind of that deeper level. And I also think that Dany's advice there around the ABCs, do you agree, do you bargain, do you cut loose, is a really good one for us to logically work through what can we do about some of these situations when it comes to that social empowerment side of things. And then two little things there on the advice, amazing stuff. And from her nana, the do everything with a good heart and life will never be hard. What a lovely way to look at life, and maybe that's something that we can all take on board. I know I'm going to take that one with me and think about that today. And then the sixth sense decision making. Take a deep breath, go with your first answer. What's your gut feel? Is that right? Is that where your emotions are leading you? I know for me, I do have a tendency to sometimes overthink these things and then come back to them and go, but I knew that wasn't right. Why did I do it anyway? Or the opposite way around, I didn't do it when I should have. So a huge thank you to Dany for sharing her story and her advice and guidance with us. It's been really, really useful. If you do want to get more involved with what's going on in the WorkJoy world, obviously we have lots of episodes of the WorkJoy Jam, our podcast. Do go and listen to those. We have Club WorkJoy, which is an amazing community of wonderful people all working on WorkJoy. We have monthly events and networking and weekly Ask Me Anythings, and lots of great things going on in the club. So do head over to clubworkjoy.com to find out more and come and join us. We would love to see you there. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.